Thanks for coming, everyone. Tonight we're going to be talking about warrior burials. Teresa and I both had the privilege of being involved in these rare and exciting burials over the years. We're going to do a bit of a double act tonight. So first off, Teresa's going to talk about her burial at Wolverton. Then I'll talk about the specific burials at Brisley Farm. And then I thought we could have a bit of discussion, maybe unpack our title a little bit and see if really these were the last Iron Age warriors of Britain. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Teresa to talk about Wolverton.
Thank you, Jim. So we're just going to start with a small introduction about late Iron Age and Iron Age generally, mortuary practices. So the Iron Age period has lots of different traditions from which some are shown here. Excarnation was probably the most common practice, and excarnation followed by secondary burials. Example of these are body parts buried within pits, within settlements, within ditches, possibly after the body has been exposed to the elements. Parts are reburied. We don't know why. Another formal inhumation is another practice. It can be the whole body within pits, sometimes within graves dug for purpose. Definitely cremation. Cremation for a long time was thought to be the main practice of the late Iron Age. Today we know it's not exclusive and different practices are present at the same time. We also think that disposing of the bodies in watery places was probably a tradition, as it was a tradition to dump weapons and other objects. More rare are the burials with weapons, which we call the warrior burials. And these are the ones we're going to talk about today. So what is a warrior burial? So the simple definition of a warrior burial is of a grave containing both the deceased and martial objects or weapons. This can be the sword, shields, spears, also daggers, helmets, body armor. And although different authors have considered different perspectives when analyzing burials with weapons, it can be said that only an exclusive number of graves containing sword, spear, and shield have been found in the South-East. So here are some of the known ones: the Kelvedon Warrior in Essex, Holsworthy Burial Warrior in Hampshire, Brisley Farm, which Jim will talk about. Then we have the North Bursted in West Sussex, and then also in West Sussex, the Wolverton burial, of which I will talk about. So all of these burials are from late Iron Age, but we're going to focus on Brisley and Wolverton, which are the late Iron Age. We're going to talk about 1st century. So all of them have been found with spear, shield, and sword. So, and this is one of the things we're focusing, is this panoply of elements, actually a combination of armory that we can see in the continent from the 3rd century onwards, but in Britain only in the last century, in the 1st century. So somehow this culture is coming to us quite late and is visible through the burials. So I'm going to talk about Wolverton now, which is in West Sussex, small village in West Sussex, not far from Chichester. And Archaeology South-East worked on site in 2019. We developed a program of archaeological evaluation followed by mitigation. You can see on this figure the layout of our site. You can see the trenches and then the bigger areas that were fully excavated. And on the east of the site, you can see the grave we're going to talk about. So the grave location, so it's not really within a settlement, it's not outside a settlement. We know there's lots of activity going on in the 100 years after the burial, but before that, it's just fields and agricultural fields. We don't know much. Why is it located there? What is it doing there, and the meaning of it? But let's just make a note on that because it's important. So just to show you, these are some images of the ongoing excavation. It was really hard to see. This site is on brick earth. In the beginning, it was really hard to see that we had a burial. Only when we start finding some charred material and metal work, we realized we were in the presence of something quite unique. And also the pots placed on one side of the pit. So it was actually quite a great work, and is a full photo of the grave. You see there's like a block that has not been excavated at this point, and the reason is because we had to lift the sword quite quick to take back to the office on that day. So this is the only photo we have with everything nearly fully excavated. And now we're going to go through what we actually found in the grave and some sort of what we think happened, by which order happened. So the grave was dug. It's quite a shallow grave, semi-rectangular. And then we know there was a container, and that large brown thing you see there is what represented the container, which was a hollow tree trunk, an oak tree trunk. And it was charred, completely charred. We had no evidence of skeletal remains being present at all, despite the fact that on site we have some preservation from similar dated contexts. We had a sword within the scabbard, and the sword was partially drawn. The sword has a very intricate metal work. There are like 4 cells on the scabbard mount with enamel on a reddish color. And the hilt, the upper and lower guards are made from horn, and the grip appears to be made from wood. We'll go back to the sword later. And then we had the spear, we had 4 vessels. These vessels are of local fabrics. They are partially complete, all of them. And then interestingly, we had lots of charred microfossils. So we had a huge quantity of plant macrofossils within the grave, because we've sampled all the fill. So everything was looked at. So, and that is quite interesting and very unusual for a grave. This amount of cereal from the period not being on a settlement is very, very unusual. We had some other metal objects present, some fragments of copper alloy that we still, well, it's still on investigation. So we think it could be part of a shield boss. So it's a big question if we had a shield or not. It's still an open question. It could be also part of a mirror or even some sort of a vessel. There's also evidence of some kind of garment or cover. We had some textile between the scabbard and the plank. And again, this is still ongoing investigation, so I can't tell you much more about it. So we have no body, although can we say it's an inhumation type of burial? Why is it located here? What happens before and after the burial on this site? What do these grave goods and weapons mean? Did they belong to someone? If so, where is that someone? Was it ever there? And what does it mean also the plant remains and the absence of human remains? So these are all questions that were just triggered by this find. So this is the Wolverton warrior burial without a warrior. But this was not the first warrior Archaeology South-East as an encounter, and 22 years ago, Jim found another two very interesting warriors, and he's going to talk about them now.
Thanks, Teresa. Let me just do this. So, yeah, as Teresa said, unbelievably, 22 years ago, Archaeology South-East found two other warrior burials. These were found at Brisley Farm in Ashford in Kent, and that's about 90 miles to the west of Wolverton. They were actually part of a much wider archaeological landscape, comprised, it's happened that occurred to over several millennia, comprised of enclosures, buildings, roundhouses, cremation cemeteries, sacred spaces, so really fields, an interesting long developed archaeological landscape which preceded and post-dated these two burials. There we are. They were, well, let's get that going. So different to the Wolverton burial, they were actually found in ditched enclosures. So these square ditched enclosures, they were next to each other, about 5 meters, 5-6 meters apart, and about a generation apart as well. So about AD 10 and about AD 40 or 50, interestingly. So those square ditched enclosures, we think, basically formed a barrow. So the ditch, it's obviously the spoil from the ditches, probably had a barrow over them. So actually these are a sort of monumental type of burial. So I will talk about them one at a time. So that, as you can see, this was dug, a well-dug grave. So the grave cut was deep, the grave was big, and it looks like it was dug with care. You can see that there was, I should say actually, the conditions at Brisley Farm were awful. So it's like willed clay. In the winter, it's full of water. Actually, you can see one of the graves is full of water there. And in the summer, it becomes like cracked and awful, as we all know, working on the clay. That does the material culture no good at all, but that's what we've got to work with. So anyway, so it was this one was a well-dug grave. You can see, as I said, so the burial container is this grey line, probably some sort of organic container, but all we've got left was this sort of silty clay, really. Within that, and I'll point out again the body. So here's what was left of the body. So unlike Wolverton, which we'll talk about in a minute, we actually had clear human remains, but very, very poorly preserved. So all we could actually say about this was that they were aged 18 to 25. No idea whether it was male or female, although these burials with swords are usually male. And there's no evidence of pathology and that. So actually, unfortunately, the remains are so poor, we couldn't tell a lot about the actual individual. So obviously, we've got to try and infer what we can. With the burial, inside the grave was the sword. It's here, drawing of, and that so the head's up here, and that sword was placed up here. The right arm was sort of flexed, and the sword was partly drawn. So it was drawn about that much from the scabbard, similar to the Wolverton burial as well, which is interesting. So what are they doing there? So imagine a funeral. They're drawing that sword, placing it in the grave. You'd think so. Just to talk a little bit about the decoration, which is here. So this is, and that, those sort of owl type eyes almost, that is the top of the scabbard. So that's the scabbard mount. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Within, what else do we have? At the head end of the grave there, you can see that pot. So that was outside of our burial container. And that's a Gallo-Belgic butt beaker dated to around AD 10. And it's very fragile. So we think that that's probably not, in fact, you know, an heirloom or something. And so as far as we can tell, is dating the burial. What else did I need to say about the sword? So the sword, if anyone's interested, is a Le 10-3 type. It's about 90 centimeters long. And the final thing, which is pretty interesting, I think, is that there was a spear, and that spear was actually found spearhead there. So that was about that long, and that spear, therefore, was probably, or must have been, at the time of burial, thrust into the side of the grave, across the burial like that. And what, if you're trying to think about what's happening at the time of the funeral, what are they doing? They've thrust that in there. It's got a shaft, and there was evidence of the wood basically in the socket of the spear. And is that sticking out the top of the grave? Are they snapping it off? I don't know. You know, there are options, but I think what I personally like about these sort of burials and these sort of things, you can try and unpick that sort of agency at the time. I digress. So that's the first one. Let me just, and then, oh right, okay. This is the same burial. This is a plan of it. You can see this is where the spear was found there. And there was a hint actually of there may have been a shield, but it was just an organic sort of stain about over there. So not really sure what was going on. So that's our first one. The grave was dug. Body probably placed in some sort of container, coffin, for want of a better word. It was extended, you know, it's supine, orientated basically north-south-ish, with a head at the north end. Skeletal remains very poor, 18 to 25-year-old, sex unclear, assumed male. And these grave goods, a potential shield, really can't say one way or the other. The iron spear thrust into the side of the grave. Love it, it's great. Fantastic sword. Oh, of course, I always forget the suspension rings. So the sword had copper rings attached to that, well, in its vicinity, and these would be used, they've been attached to the scabbard and used to attach the sword by period sort of straps of various kind to the body. I remember at the time when I was working on the Brisley publication, I was trying to work out and try to do a lot of research on how these things would actually work and attach, and I never really kind of satisfactorily found that out, to be honest. And therefore, and there was just that one pottery vessel that was found at the head end there, which we are pretty much dating that burial on. So, and so we're calling it roughly AD 10. Now, just to the 5 or 6 meters away, the second burial went in, and this superficially is quite similar, but actually there's, I think, some really interesting differences with this one. Now, to start with, you can see the state of the site and the clay, actually, to be honest. You know, all this cracked, sort of, it was dug in the summer, so imagine how difficult that was for Casper and his team to dig that. This grave was small, it was shallow, and it appeared sort of hastily dug, almost without care. And there's the burial itself, the remains were supine, but they were twisted, almost like twisted into the grave. So there's some slightly different things going on. There was, again, a burial container, but that container like the first one. There was just a sort of an organic trace of it. Opposite to the first one, this was the other way round, so that its head was to the south, its feet to the north, even though it's quite near. And the sword, interestingly, the sword was bigger, so it was about 5 centimeters bigger. The person was short, so the sword might be incongruous with the person. And that sword was flipped. So the basically the hilt was pointed towards the feet, and the point of the sword towards the head. And that is unusual. I think there's only one other example of that, which I can't remember what it is now at the minute. But there is, you know, again, just like drawing of the sword in the first one, you'd think that is, you know, it's not accidental. We don't go to all this effort for these panoply of grave goods and then think, oh well, you know, we just sling the sword in. It is placed there, and that inversion of it, I think, is important. Is important basically. There was a spear, which you can see here, which is bent. Again, that's not that unusual. You know, this is sort of destruction of weapons at the time of burial. This time there was definitely a shield, because there was an iron shield boss found over the centre of the burial, and that was again in poor condition, of course, but is more of a sort of Roman type than an Iron Age type. And there were three pottery vessels, including a Terra Nigra platter, which had a stamp on it, a Canacos, which is dated to sort of, I think, 25 to 40-ish AD, another butt beaker, and a small pedestal cup. Now they are all roughly date the burial to about 40 to 50 AD. So that's, we think, about a generation later than the first Brisley Farm one. And again, about the same date as your Wolverton burial, so which is about 40 or 50 as well. Finally, there was in this burial half a pig's head placed on the body. So presumably the other half and the rest of the pig was consumed as part of the, you know, the funerary rites, wake or whatever. So that's, I think that's it. Oh, and there was suspension. I've forgotten it again. There were suspension rings as well with the sword. So there we are. Oh, and there was a brooch. I always forget the brooch. And there we are. This is, as you can see, quite a small grave. Really sort of crammed in there. That's the skull. We actually know this. Did I mention we know this one actually was 18 to 25, and we know it was male. Can't remember if I said that. And all of that together, we think is dating it roughly to 40 or 50 AD-ish. So about the time of the conquest, interestingly. What was interesting about Brisley Farm is the actual the archaeological landscape as a whole, and there was a whole succession of, it's really complicated to unpick basically, succession of enclosures, trackways, buildings, just one on top of the other, especially as it got into the 1st century AD, where there's like an explosion of activity. This occurred prior to the warrior burials and during, while they were there. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but the bit I'd sort of like to focus on really is in the later 1st century AD. There was an enclosure dug. There we go. Right in front of the warrior burials. So that one there is the first one. So that's the AD 10, the more monumental, I would say, one dug with more care. And almost this later one has become sort of slightly marginalised on the corner. And in this ditch here, there was like a series of deposits of pottery, animal bone, burnt animal bone. So there's almost like sort of ritual veneration, sort of deposition going on right in front of this grave. Okay, so what's interesting is that Brisley Farm is essentially an Iron Age site that really sort of kind of exploded into action, as it were, in the sort of 1st century BC and 1st century AD. But about 1 kilometre away to the east is something called Westhoup Farm, which is like a Roman town that, as Brisley Farm declined, kind of grew. And I wonder, because this is its, when it starts to grow is around sort of like the late 1st century, whether people from Westhoup Farm are coming, visiting the old site of Brisley Farm with these funerary monuments there and making some sort of votive veneratory depositions into these graves, or into the barrow ditches in front of the graves, basically. So yeah, just quite interesting. It does become a sort of focus of cultic activity, I could say. I thought, so that's kind of a run through of Brisley Farm. I thought that Teresa, we thought Teresa and I would basically do a little bit of a quick compare and contrast of our different burials to see what we think. If I maybe just start with the Brisley Farm, because I've just been talking about them. So they were about a generation apart. I think the graves were very different. The first careful, the second maybe rushed. Body treated differently, one north-south, one south-north. I think the second one could potentially be perceived as richer because there's more artifacts, but it's got British weaponry, imported ceramics, and the swords. I think the swords is where the interest is. With the first one drawn, the second one inverted. That's pretty unusual, that inversion, and I think probably deliberate. Therefore, and we'll revisit this in a minute, was maybe the first person actually a warrior, actually part of a warrior burial. The second at this strange time of the invasion, given the trappings of a warrior, maybe with was he really one? And were they critical elements of that sort of funerary tradition kind of disrupted or inverted at the time of burial? Teresa.
Yeah, so we can kind of compare our burials, our burials. So the Wolverton burial we can place around 40 to 50 AD, which is about the time your second burial comes. One thing unique about the Wolverton burial is the fact that there is no evidence of human remains, no teeth, no cremated bone.
And are we sure about that?
Yeah, we are pretty sure about that because we do have animal bone from the same period from the site in conditions that are similar. So, and the fact that we didn't find any evidence, not even in terms of staining in the soil, and everything was sampled. So we believe it was really absent.
So there are other organics in that
other
area
organics,
as well.
yes, we do have some textile also present, some plant remains. So we think if bone was present, something would have been there, some bits and pieces.
So it looks like they're burying them without a body, maybe?
So yeah, so we're thinking this actually happened. There was never a body in that grave. So we can't tell anything about an individual, right? But we know that it was meant to be for someone. It does have the look of a grave that it was for an extended inhumation, which is like yours.
Yeah,
it's a grave.
Yeah.
It's a grave. And the interesting thing is about your second burial, your first burial actually, and Wolverton is the drawn swords.
Yeah. So the investigative conservation, which was actually done by two different labs, in fact, and 15 years apart, has both identified that the swords were drawn by about 10 centimeters or so from the scabbard. So they're drawn.
They're drawn.
Placed in the
There's
grave.
definitely some meaning to it.
So
yeah.
we'll explore in a moment, maybe.
So another thing we think is similar is also the motive on the scabbards,
Hang on,
isn't it?
Excuse me. I think. There we go.
Yeah, and there we go.
Yeah.
We can look at the swords.
So, that's the Brisley Farm example, and Teresa, you can. Sorry,
Yeah, that's the Wolverton one. You can see like 4 cells. They would have contained this reddish enamel on it. There's some engraved lines also, and the open work, the circular forms, the organic motifs, they are also similar.
So there are comparative examples of this. You can see, like, the sort of kind of theme and the style of these things are pretty similar. These classic sort of Celtic sort of design, I suppose. Basically, the Wolverton one and the Brisley Farm one and one other, I think, are the only ones that have been found in graves. The rest of these that have these sort of iconography. If you want to call it that.
So the majority of the weapons and the swords we know for the period, only 13% come from graves. So it's quite a rare thing.
Let's just flip back.
Yeah,
we can. Anything else?
So the spear. We think the Wolverton grave also had a possible bent spear, although we don't have the spear as complete as you have in yours, but there was definitely a spear, a possible shield, right? You also have possibly definitely one in the later grave, and maybe a shield. What about the vessels? So although we have the same type of sword and everything, the vessels are completely different.
They're different, aren't they?
Yeah. So in Wolverton, everything is local, is produced locally.
And whereas the Brisley Farm examples have imported pottery from the continent.
And also is the type of grave and the location of the grave. So in Wolverton, single grave, no evidence of a barrow, no enclosures. It's just, well, it's not scattered in the landscape, but is definitely not included in such a complex landscape.
The Brisley Farm appears to be integral with the landscape, and these are monuments, barrows that are revisited, and so we can't actually see what was happening above the ground.
We do believe in Wolverton. Actually, the grave still visible for the next 50 to 100 years, considering the activity that happens in the area and the fact that they've kind of redesigned the landscape, and it seems that they've avoided intentionally the area of the grave. So probably people would come to visit too, but it's just not as evident.
Okay. I think we'll
pass
flip on, shall we? How do we do it? And okay, so we thought we'd unpack our title a little bit, which
So maybe, drawn swords, I think.
Maybe start with drawn swords and the Walking Dead.
So this Wolverton grave is quite interesting because it makes your mind kind of think of things. Why there was an empty grave? Was it intentionally empty? And what's the meaning? Is it like a cenotaph? Well, the idea of a cenotaph is just based on the word an empty grave. But for us on the 21st century, it means also the memory of one or more individuals, right? So we can kind of think this evokes the same idea of a cenotaph, if definitely there was no one in there. Is a bit different than a memorial because it really invokes the idea of someone being dead, being buried, being laid to rest. So we think other meanings also could have been the reason for this. And we can imagine that someone had died away in difficult conditions where the body couldn't be retrieved, and you would like to still do a burial, create this, recreate the funerary rites for the community, basically. So we really don't know if there was an intention of bearing the unique memory of an individual or of something. But we know that it's significant, the idea of representing a buried body and giving them weapons and offerings is quite interesting. And the most interesting is the dates. So when we're looking at Wolverton, we're looking at the brink of the Roman conquest. And maybe for these people, the Romans are already there, they're coming, and this identity of the old warrior was being lost and maybe being laid to rest too. This maybe we can kind of discuss this together.
Let me. Okay. Is that?
Yeah, we have. I think this is probably the most interesting part of this, of putting together all these warriors. Maybe this idea that they are probably the last ones of their kinds.
Can we, to unpack our title a bit more, can we really say that these were the last Iron Age warriors of Britain? Actually, of course, that's impossible to actually say what these people did in real life. We can see what they probably was represented there. These are, what is interesting is these are one of the few times in the Iron Age archaeological record where a role or profession is kind of represented. So I think really in some ways this is more about the image of a warrior and what that's sort of telling us rather than what the people actually did. We know who were they? We know they must have been elite, even the non-Wolverton person, because the richness of the graves. But also from Brisley Farm, what's interesting is because it's a wider archaeological landscape, there's cremation cemeteries there as well of the same date. Interestingly, the cremation cemetery is sort of circular, like West Hampton. And so the normal, maybe the everyday populace are being cremated, whereas we can see these sort of more elite burials here. So what we know is that we might not know in life what these people did, but in death they have been buried as warriors. The image of one of them has been buried as a warrior, even if the person isn't there, and not as spear-wielding foot soldiers, which we think of in the Iron Age, probably maybe the warrior bands, the spear is more ubiquitous, but of sword-bearing captains or leaders. And I know we years ago, Casper talked, and we think maybe are these sort of precursors of the knights of the Middle Ages or something weird like that? That sort of like level. I think it's interesting that the iconography on the sword and the hilt would have been very visible and maybe recognisable if people was wearing it, and so you can see it's obvious. So really, although we might not know that these are the last actual people who were warriors in the Iron Age, we know that actually these are the very latest of this type of burial in Britain and on the continent. So they are actually, in some ways, buried as an image in the last people to be buried like this in the Iron Age. I thought I'd just like to finish up, if I may.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So just to lighten it up, take it a little bit away from the archaeology a little bit. With the Wolverton burial, Teresa, Lou, and Emily Johnson and myself, we worked on a press release with UCL Media and released that, and it was pretty successful, like picked up by the nationals, as it were. And this is just an excuse for me to show you the Sun headline, which is dead fancy. Posh grave of Iron Age warrior buried 2,000 years ago. So, I think we'd like to finish there. And I think it's what's interesting is that this image of the warrior is evocative even now, and that is really what people picked up on, even if there wasn't actually a warrior in the grave, unless the dead did actually walk.
We still look at it as a warrior being there because there's the weapons.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.